everybody's got their beverage of choice. I've got mint tea.
Yeah.
I had to resort to soda pop this evening because my sinuses are so bad, and just a little bit of caffeine seems to clear the head.
Yeah.
I'm having my mushroom tea. Not that kind.
Nice.
The immunomodulated kind.
You're going to tell us all about that, aren't you?
The 5 defenders in Chinese medicine.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of funk out there in the atmosphere. There's a lot
Sure is.
of bugs, a lot of
There
bugs.
is.
What's the mushroom? Which
It's actually it's a medicinal formula of 5 to, well, actually this one has 10 different medicinal mushrooms in it that support immune functioning and make your nasal passages a hostile environment. And
do you make that? Do you put it together?
No. It's a formula. You can get it at a pharmacy, or you can at a Chinese pharmacy, or you can probably get it at a any place you get supplements and herbs and stuff.
Yeah.
You can get it at Sid's probably.
Probably, yeah. What's it called? We want to know.
Well, there's one. Well, the formula is called 5 Defenders. So I don't know. There's a bunch of different companies that probably manufacture that formula, and sometimes they'll throw other stuff like adaptogenic stuff in there.
I was really into broths for a while and doing all these different broths with the variety of veggies and herbs, and it was really interesting actually, and it was so hard to make the broth and then throw out all of those pieces that simmered in it, so you have to find some bread or something to make with that, but yeah, that was
puree it and make it, put it in the freezer and make a different kind of soup.
There you go.
Add it as a thickener or something. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and introduce this.
Off topic.
Sorry, we veer, right? Okay, so welcome to Millicent Unplugged. I like to start, my name is Karen Chertok. I'm the Director of Education at the Millicent Rogers Museum, and we always like to start off with a land acknowledgement. At the Millicent Rogers Museum, we are located on ancestral lands of Tiwa-speaking peoples, known today as the Red Willow people of Taos Pueblo. We strive to deepen our relationship with the Red Willow people through collaboration, while acknowledging and honoring the complex history of the Red Willow people, past, present, and future. We express gratitude to this land and to the Taos Pueblo elders and ancestors who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. So thank you for joining us tonight. Our topic is community wellness. And I would like to thank KCEI reporter Mike Tilley for suggesting that topic. And that being said, we are open to community members suggesting topics, and we'll be happy to try to put those programs together in the future. Community wellness is everybody's business. How do we care for each other during challenging circumstances? And what are some of the ways we measure community wellness? It begins with dialogue. Museums are places where dialogues can foster community wellness through arts and culture. Museums can expand the use of public resources and spaces to engage in community-wide efforts that support vitality. We can seek intersections of outreach with other nonprofit organizations to strengthen community responsiveness. Thank you for joining us for this first museum conversation with our guests from impactful organizations concerned with community wellness. And we'd like to welcome Siena Sanderson, the Director of Taos Behavioral Health Nursing Centers, and Juliana Anastasov, who directs the Northern Health Extension Rural Office. She is a hero. Thank you for being with us, Juliana. And Whitney Lake, who is from Community Against Violence. She is a clinical coordinator and psychotherapist. And unfortunately, Gina Cordova from Taos LEAD, which stands for let everyone advance with dignity was not able to join us this evening. So hopefully we'll get to talk to her at a future time. So Sarah, would you like to get us started?
I would. The most important thing to me about this program and why I feel very honored to be the moderator here is that may I give a major shout out to your organizations, but more so to you ladies individually for the responsibility you were willing and able to take up in these most extraordinarily important, personal, and difficult things that we all deal with, whether it's within our own families, ourselves, and inner and outer self, and the community at large. So if I might, I'd like to know more about your organization, and then a little bit more about you individually. Juliana, may I ask you to begin talking about your role at the University of New Mexico in the Taos Extension?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to join you all this evening. So yes, I work with an initiative of the University of New Mexico Health Sciences Center called Health Extension. And essentially what the Health Sciences Center has done is taken the cooperative extension model that you see that's predominant across the country for more than over 100 years, where the nation's land-grant universities embed resources in community. And traditionally that's, in agricultural communities to improve agriculture, to support farmers and ranchers, and to improve rural life, support rural families. And so the idea came up, and now there's about 17 academic health centers across the country doing something called health extension, where they've sort of translated that model from the agricultural sector into the health sector. And so for the past, I'd say almost 15 years now, I've been working with this initiative, and I'm part of a statewide team across the state that are operating regional hubs where we function essentially as pro bono training and technical assistance providers. And in the same way, I'd go work with my ag agent if I had some funk in my pasture that was choking out my alfalfa. I'll work with health systems, primary care organizations, community-based organizations in the same way that my ag agent works with us around cows and hay. And in the same way that my county extension agent also runs 4-H programs to build the agricultural pipeline, we're very much involved in building the health professions pipeline. And so I operate one of those regional hubs here in the North Central region. I have a colleague over in the Northwest covering Shiprock, Navajo Nation, Four Corners area, on the border in Hobbs. And then we have partners that help extend our reach. Of course, we're several of our team based in Bernalillo County around the university. And then we have partners that help extend our reach in various counties. So I kind of cover these 5 North Central counties in the northern part of the state as part of that initiative. So that's what I do.
You're a huge link then between the people who have their boots on the ground, so to speak, and then the actual people who need help, who have questions that in their expertise it wasn't covered, and you then do that. Now, Siena, how does this, you all know each other, and so how do you interface? Tell us about the behavioral health and the nurturing center that you work with. How does this, tell us about that and how you work together.
Right. So the nurturing centers are now located in 3 different schools. So we have one in Taos at the Enos Garcia, Ranchos Elementary, and up in Peñasco. And it is in each of those communities, there's the rural clinics. So we have the incredible clinic up in Peñasco. So there is an interface with our nurturing center, which is located at the school. So we often make referrals over to the clinic. It's imperative that we have those clinics at our access for medical care. Because, I mean, I remember when there was nothing, and it's, we have them in El Rito, they're popping up, and it's been an incredible resource for our families to have those resources, those medical resources. But the nurturing center at the 3 schools that I described provide support not only to the children, but we also provide support to the families. And I have to give a shout out to Juliana, because I remember when I started working with Las Cumbres and we were working with developing family navigation work. This is really the work that the Nurturing Center is doing largely. And we work very closely with the Spot, which is also located in Peñasco, where we try to connect families to resources in the state and in the county. So we are not only supporting the children in the schools through social emotional learning, we're also providing individual support to students who come into the Nurturing Center. And then we also provide family navigation work. And really, Juliana, I remember us talking years and years ago about the importance of family navigation and how we really need to see it in housing authority. We just need to see people helping families navigate resources, because in Taos County, we do not have like a social service office. And so embedding our services in the schools gives us an incredible ability to access families, because families feel relatively comfortable accessing services through a school because it's a familiar place. And so we're glad to be able to provide that support to families. But we do a lot of financial resources. We refer people to, the oddest things. I can't even tell you how many different odd things we provide. And at some point, we were doing work in the jail to try to connect parents who had been incarcerated. We were trying to connect them to some resources and to help support those families outside of the jail. So we'd go into the jail and ask, where are your children? And then we would find out, who's taking care of their children and offer support to them. And that's really how we started working a lot more with grandparents. And then it's funny, then we have Whitney Lake, who really started our grandparent support group. And through Las Cumbres in Taos County. So, because there was a strong program in Española, and now we have a pretty good program. I just got the list from Peñasco, and there are 40 children in the Peñasco schools who are being raised by grandparents. And I think at Candy Allen works in our office providing support to grandparents, and she does a lot of assistance with kinship guardianship, and she probably did 50 kinship guardianships last year. So that we're just seeing an increasing need to support those grandparents. So it's interesting that I'm here with Juliana and Whitney because both of them have been very pivotal to the work that we're doing at the Nurturing Center, and both of them have been large influences on the work I do, just in conversation and what do we need, how do we bring those supports to those families. So I'm delighted to be with both of them and appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Siena, that sounds to me as though you are the embodiment of it takes the village.
Yeah.
To the children.
Yeah.
And I'm particularly interested in the grandparents thing because I was raised for 5 years by my grandmother because my parents were musicians and traveled all over the world. And so I kind of got parked for a different reason than a disaster. But Whitney, take this up here because obviously you're the expert in that department, and tell us about your roles.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so for those that aren't familiar with Community Against Violence, and some people may not be, Community Against Violence is a long-standing organization in Taos in northern New Mexico, serving, the structural foundation of it is serving victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse. Over the years, our program has expanded in a lot of ways. I mean, we run the gamut of connecting people with resources, providing services, financial support. We have programs that work with offenders, families, children. And so as I'm listening to Siena and Juliana talk, there's a lot of intersection in what CAV does in outlying communities, really in northern New Mexico. So whether it's utilizing already existing community centers in various communities like Peñasco or Espanola or Velarde, Raton, wherever it is. There's a strong community partnership that exists for CAV across northern New Mexico. And hopefully, our goal is the aim is to support and provide whatever resources the communities and also individuals who are seeking our services need. And you said it really well. Siena really is the embodiment of it takes a village. And, over the years, there's been some pretty staggering statistics reported in Taos County in northern New Mexico. And, our goal is to alleviate and support people in whatever way we can to shift those statistics favorably for family, community, individuals. So, yeah.
How do you feel that the populace is calling upon you? Are you seeing an amelioration? It can't help but be with the amount of time and effort you're putting in, but in general, obviously there are more people. Are you getting more and more clients? What's the usage?
Yeah, I think that that's probably a general trend everywhere. I don't think that that's specific to, CAV in our work right now, whether it's community outreach or mental health or supportive services. I think that that's true for all agencies across northern New Mexico, across the state, and really across the country. So yeah, it would be great to say we work ourselves out of business, but I don't know that that's going to happen. The clientele need is intense and it continues to intensify. And, one thing that I can offer a sure testament to is through the course of the pandemic, like what, and as we maybe are coming out the other side of it, we're really recognizing like the strain that has exacerbated for families and individuals.
Yeah,
it certainly has, and very much in the arts community too. If I can direct the conversation between you now just a little bit, we think at the museum as a repository of history and culture and antecedents, the ancestors, a huge amount of things, and of course, confluence of arts and daily life. And so, Karen, would you kind of speak briefly to the mission of the museum? Because our ask to you ladies is, how can the museum do better or do things to help in your programs?
Sure, and I would like to broaden that scope a little bit, because obviously our perspective is the Millicent Rogers Museum, but also just in terms of museums as in general, as a cultural asset in communities. I think that these topics are relevant across the broad spectrum of museums as a whole. I found it very interesting, Siena, that you brought up the grandparents raising grandchildren, and this is such a trend nationwide, really. And so in terms of resources, one of the topics that I'm interested in is how can we help? Because I don't actually know that there is a full understanding. So I think we were speaking about this just prior to the recording. We hear a lot in our museum publications within the realm of museums. There's a lot of conversation about community outreach and serving the communities that we're in. I know that we do a lot of looking at data and demographics the same way you all do, and looking at how to connect with at-risk populations. So museums are places where empathy is built, and empathy is going to be essential. It is essential, as we all know, in connecting with any resolution to any problem. And so, how can we be of help? I'll give you a quick example. There's an organization in town that had a problem with their facility, and just kind of through the grapevine, I learned of this, and I called and said, hey, what are you guys doing? How are you serving your clients? And they weren't at that time. They didn't have any place. I said, well, come on over. We've got an ed room. So how do we engage as a community and interweave our resources and our desires for wellness and help people understand that museums can be part of that solution equation?
Mhm.
So jump right in here. This is the conversation part. So,
Well, it's interesting because I taught art in the schools prior to doing the work I'm doing now. And I personally feel it's critical to engage children in art. It's an incredibly healing opportunity. It's just plain fun. I mean, kids really need to have more opportunity for that. And you had a very strong education component at some point. And so students came to to the Millicent Rogers Museum all the time. And because I brought them there on a number of occasions, and it was wonderful. And I think reintroducing that where you're bringing kids to your museum would be one way I could see contributing. I mean, and the other thing is, at one point I had thought about bringing grandparents with their grandkids over to the museum, having like an evening where they could just come over, we could have dinner, and there would be an opportunity for them to take a private tour of the museum and do an art project. That kind of activity, I think, would be spectacular for families to be able to engage, because you are an incredible resource to the community, an amazing collection, and giving people that opportunity to really see it and doing it with their children and their grandchildren would be that's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
grandparents' night?
Yeah, grandparents' night.
That's 110% right off, and we haven't even done it.
Yeah.
And Whitney, when I was looking at the information you sent me as far as your bio goes and some of the different therapies that you work with, and the relational therapy, and I was actually thinking immediately about patterns, because we have a whole book and sort of curriculum about patterns in the museum. So, taking the concrete patterns and then expanding that into the patterns of relationships and thinking that some of your therapies engage with, it seems like a great match as well. And so I'm also thinking that we should offer, so we have several groups in town that get free admission. They just call and say, hey, we're coming over. And I want people to know that more, because we certainly would, welcome any of you bringing clients or, to the museum, because we want that accessibility piece to not be a barrier.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I mean, you're right, Karen, when we were talking before the recording started, one of the things you were mentioning is recognizing some of the needs in the community, right? And you had mentioned food scarcity in a sense. And so, I think that that's where a lot of this starts for people, is recognizing the needs that exist in the community, because they're immense, but it doesn't mean that we can't provide support, in an appropriate way through our organizations and whatever that looks like. Facilitate, like you said, facilitating nights for groups of people, grandparents, teens, youth, people that this isn't necessarily on the radar for, because when survival is an issue, right? Like, we're not really thinking about which museum can I get to today,
Right.
Which also highlights that, your point around they may be underutilized in an aspect, and there's much more that can be offered to support the community.
Yeah.
And I wanted to chime in here, because it's not only the families or children at risk, the entire community.
Right.
We wish we could welcome, 200 people every day. I mean, that's a bit overkill, but nevertheless, just being able to talk to the people that come in and see their reactions, that's how we know to serve better as well. And what are the things they're interested in, their issues? How can we tell them about the ancestral things that are so strong in northern New Mexico?
So I have a short story that I can share with regard to what you just said, Sarah, that is so important. So before the pandemic, I've been at the museum for 4 years. My background is in special education. I focused on students with autism for many years. And so before I was here right before the pandemic started, and we had 2 field trips before closing down. One of them was a 2nd grade field trip. And I will never forget this little 2nd grader running around the corner and seeing, I don't know if you've all been to the museum, I'm hoping you have, to galleries 7 and 8, where the Hispano devotional arts are. And he just lit up and he went right up to the glass and he said, "It's just like at home." Which, you know, that was so heartwarming. And it's like, we got to get all the kids in here, you know. And then, of course, now we're rebuilding. And I can say that we had more school field trips last year. We're already having school field trips scheduled this year. So those pieces will fall into place. But seeing those connections to self, I think, are very important. And then really quickly, because I want Juliana to kind of speak to this, maybe, I've done some research. There was a medical facility back east that partnered with a museum, because the theory that they were positing was that if people felt better social, emotionally, and were doing things active in the community, that they would have better outcomes with their health care. And so they had a specific partnership, and they found that indeed that was true. So I'm curious if you have any information about that.
Sure. Well, and this is really a hard thing for folks that are involved in healthcare to kind of acknowledge when they first hear it. But, you know, what we do in clinics and exam rooms account for about 10% of how well and how long people live. And what really shapes and drives health are the circumstances in which we live, in the places where we live, grow, work, play, age. And in public health, we call that the social determinants of health. The World Health Organization is now making very transparent, it's the social and political determinants of health. And so if you know that, and all the things that we've been talking about, let's imagine I have a patient who has a couple of chronic conditions, hypertension and diabetes. My treatment plan goes down the toilet if there is not food security in the home. If there's not, and you know, y'all are talking about getting to the museum. I'm 35 miles away from the museum. I don't get to the museum. My kids never have been to the museum. Right. And so when you think about, you are saying, well, go eat this special food and the grocery store is 30 miles away, or you need to walk 4 times away. And now my new neighbor has some dogs and it's do I get into it with the neighbor? Right. So it's all of these things. So that's in terms of the physical environment, the built environment, the social environment, the cultural environment. All of those things build the goodness that is available in the community. And what I think one of the challenges is to make that more equitable. And that's some of the things that you're talking about in terms of being able to see yourself. In the healthcare realm, we know that when our workforce looks like the community, we retain that workforce. And we know that that workforce actually yields more effective outcomes medically. So what's up with who the provider is and how does that affect an outcome if we're just talking about the practice of medicine? All of this is deeply infused in the environment that either drives us in the direction and supports health or not, in the opposite direction. And so really what we have a challenge of, because these are technical problems that we know the answers to, we have the answers. right? So they're deeper, they're cultural problems, they're political problems, they're ethical problems. So the idea of healthcare working with museums makes all kinds of sense, especially when you bring in literacy. One of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about literacy and bringing kids in is the Dolly Parton Imagination Library that actually my kids have benefit. Now, Dolly Parton's over there in Tennessee, but my kids know the Dolly Parton Imagination Library because it's been in the Peñasco Pueblo gym.
Yeah.
Where my kids played basketball when they were little.
Yeah.
And it's also down the hill at the Embudo Valley Library, right? And that's how they make it available. So taking things, and you know, in public health, we have this notion of outreach that is often, when we're talking about individuals, often it's taking information to individuals to bring them into services, or taking services out to where people are at. But when we talk about institutions, there are qualities of outreach, you know, and that's some of what you've been talking about. So, you know, some outreach can look like, you know, dispatches from the institution. It can be dialogue like this. It can actually be collaboration, and the collaboration can result in what you were talking about in terms of all the ways that we all work together. You can be a catalyst for that. Institutions can assess how impactful they are on the social determinants of health. Things like, do we pay a living wage? And does our workforce reflect the community? And do we procure from local women and minority businesses? What's our economic impact in the community? What's our opportunity impact in communities? So if institutions can think about, and even healthcare can think about, health is more than healthcare. So can we think about, okay, yeah, we're doing really good with chronic conditions and prevention, but what are we doing about community prevention? And the deeper we get with engagement, till we move from the outreach of we're dispatching out to we're collaborating, we're resource sharing, we're power sharing, we're decision making together. Now we're changing dynamics in communities, and we're really, this is where, and now we're getting at the structural drivers of health. What is driving health, and in what direction is it driving it? So, you know, I always say that knowing that 10% number is like, I probably would have had more impact on health if I was a third grade reading teacher than a public health worker, when you really think about the impact of social determinants. And so I think if everyone, like, I'm an evangelist, you know, I mean, anyone who can see themselves as a public health worker, I can make that argument, and I can draw the direct line between what you do and whether you're creating health in the community, you know, conditions for health and driving things in the, or otherwise. And I think the more that we identify ourselves as that, then we can think of, so how do we have common frameworks to understand what we do, and how do we work together, and how do we show up for each other? How does healthcare show up for education when stuff's before the legislature? How do we lobby our, how do we educate our lawmakers so that they show up in support for interpersonal and domestic violence, you know, or for community schools? So I think that if we can, the more that institutions can see themselves as health serving, and do some assessment around that, even equity assessments, you know, like, do we have are we creating equitable access, or is it still one thing that my kids did have amazing access to is skiing. I never skied. Skiing is something that people that had resources that my family didn't have did. So we don't ski. My kids went to Peñasco, Sipapu, $10, your kids could ski and get, so my kids got to participate in something that, to just be frank, was a class barrier for me as a kid growing up, you know? And so here was an institution that, because of proximity, kind of broke that up and created a different kind of opportunity for kids that otherwise would not get it. So I think, you know, it's lots and lots of ideas here. But I think they're all connected, and I think you guys are absolutely right on in terms of identifying how institutions that typically are not seen as creating health or protecting or preserving or promoting health are in fact doing that.
I think you've just proved that nothing is linear, that it is all circular, and
Yeah.
intertwined.
Right.
And I mean, the eloquence that just came out of Juliana is, I said, wow. May I pose a question from Mike Tilley in the chat? He is asking a toughie, namely, how do you deal with the issue of historic trauma? Now, he does not say whether he means historic in the manner of Oñate, for instance, or historic within a couple of generations of family. But how would you reply to his question?
I'd like to add to that, since there's a bit of a pause there. So I would like to add to Mike's question a little bit, because we're also, so I want to separate it out into cultural, historic trauma, and then we hear a lot of this term trauma informed. So I don't think necessarily people know that term, and maybe we could talk about both aspects of that.
Mm-hmm.
And Whitney, it sounds like you do some therapies around addressing those issues.
Yeah, so let me just make sure I'm clear on the question that I think I'm hearing, Karen. So when you're talking about trauma-informed services, like, is your question, like, how are those conceptualized for people?
I think my question actually is just very simply, what is meant by that term?
Sure, yeah.
I'll tell you what my assumption is, not having studied it greatly, is that the person, the provider, is somebody who is informed about the manifestations of trauma experience. And so that could be very helpful for the general public to even know.
Yeah, so it is, yes, that's the aim, right? So simply put, the provider, the practitioner, the public healthcare worker, the teacher, regardless of what your role is, my hope is that, looking at things through a trauma-informed lens, like, if I really wanted to dial it down and just simplify it as much as possible, is we don't want to increase any trauma that people that are seeking services may experience, right? And so to me, here's what that means, okay? We approach it in a way that supports an individual and, for lack of a better term, like, really walks alongside of them, right? Like, I don't pretend to be an expert over anybody else. I'm not going to impress or oppress what I think people should do. To me, it means, like, completely removing barriers and really saying to the people, like, what is it that you need, and how do we approach it from that perspective? Because let's just be really honest, right? Like, we may have tools to offer people and guidance to offer people, but individuals are their own experts. They may need help accessing some of those things. And so for me, like, I guess in trying to answer this question, like, base level is, let's not assume that we know what's better for anybody else than they do. They may need some help and support in getting there. But when you're working with traumatized individuals, traumatized community, lineages of trauma, it's frequently like breaking down some of the assumptions that are there. And like, I'm not trying to ride in on my white horse and say, here's how we need to help you. It's like, what is it that I can do to support you in these endeavors? And, how do we create partnership around that, and investigate resources and, whatever's identifiable for you.
And this is such a relevant question too, because as a museum, we have those discussions, and it comes up because we live in the context of historical trauma with communities that have experienced historical trauma. And so we are very open to hearing, how can we do this better? How can we present things better? How can we answer questions for people better? Because a lot of times all we can do is say, well, this is what is, and it's present. We could just be present with it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that in and of itself, like Juliana was kind of saying, I mean, I feel like I can kind of link that back to it. Like, what is it that the community is asking? And what are the answers that the communities are looking for, right?
Yeah.
So how do we support the needs of the community? The best way to answer those questions is really listening to the needs of the community, to the people. You can, in my opinion, you can only measure community wellness by some of the least served people that exist in our community. If it's not about individual wellness, it's about a collective wellness. And if we have people that are experiencing homelessness and food shortage and lack of health care and unsafe living conditions, whatever that means, whether there's violence or, they don't have adequate heat or, whatever, however we want to conceptualize that, like that is the health of our community. And that's where we need to start. And those are the things that we need to be looking at when we're addressing what community needs are.
Whitney, to me, what you're expressing is that one of the jobs, and perhaps it's one of the harder ones, you're not riding in on the white horse, but you are helping to engage the individual to think about their own needs. And that seems to me to be maybe the first step at healing, whatever those traumas happen to be, or the lacks in their environment and their life. Because once they say, oh, well, gee, if I had some heat, then then my arthritis wouldn't act up so much.
Right.
And maybe they didn't think of it in that way before, but by you eliciting to drawing out, and so acting as, in actual fact, an old-fashioned medium to pull those things out and then say, aha, here are resources. May I offer them?
Seems like that's some of what you do, Siena, in the nursing centers and within the context of the school system.
Yeah, I think I would echo everything that Juliana and Whitney are saying. And, I kind of refer to in-reach outreach, that we, getting people to go in and people going out, and that we're trying to connect more closely. And the purpose of what I see our work is to create positive experiences for children and for families. And I think that's a really important piece every day, is trying to find how do we create some positive experiences. And that's a challenge. And I think the pandemic has wreaked havoc on the emotional well-being of our children and their families. And I think it's been a real struggle to come back and to really see how can we improve the lives of our families. And and as Whitney says, we have to listen, and we have to really pay attention to what they tell us they need, because it's been baffling to me what I've been seeing. And I think it really is important for us to listen. And I'm really looking forward to, we're trying to do more of that in these next few months with the 5th and 6th graders. We're trying to help with that transition from the elementary to the middle school. So we want to have some real serious conversations with those kids. But I'm excited at the idea of really having conversations. But I think what I appreciate in the discussion tonight is, how do we maybe even create other places where these discussions can have? Like, why do we not have it in that incredible room where you have the rugs? That's always been one of my favorite rooms. But let's have a conversation there. Exactly. And so it's like, how do we encourage people to participate in something that they wouldn't normally participate, which becomes a positive experience? And I think that's where I see this link is. And what Juliana's talking, I was just baffled by that 10%. It's left me with a lot of thinking, and that we really need to look at what is our role for that other 90%. How do we create more positive experiences and experiences that impact that, that health? So I really appreciated those comments. So
I think that's a great idea, Siena, because we can have those conversations in person, in the gallery spaces, and who knows who would show up for that and what would sort of organically emerge through those conversations.
Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful idea.
Mhm.
And this,
Yeah.
I was hoping that this would be sort of a first conversation because there are so many organizations out there. We haven't even touched yet, Juliana, on 100% Taos.
Oh,
And you know, that is a whole conversation in and of itself. Youth Heartline, there are so many people that could gather and have conversations. And you know, another aspect of this that I would love to hear more about, learn more about, have some things emerge is the assessment piece. You know, how are we assessing? What demographics should we be looking at? How do we assess our own programs to see if we're meeting those demographics?
one thing that baffles me in our conversation is as an artist, I was never able to really outreach to more than maybe 2 or 3 people at a time. And of course, community outreach is way greater. I cannot, in what I do, I can't help at all. But how do you ladies manage to not always be just a one-on-one, which obviously is a success, but your job is huge in the number of people you must serve. What do you think about that university-wise, Juliana?
Well, that's why my practice is really at a community systems institutional level. I spent 20 years seeing patients in clinic and then started developing programming and then developing workforce. I realized I could spend 8 hours seeing kids in the school-based health clinic in Espanola High School, but if I could train a half a dozen others, they could be in a half a dozen high school school-based health clinics. So that was sort of where, you know, to speak to your question, personally, that was the transition for me was, you don't get the same rewards as direct service. But you know, if I can have an impact on a third-year medical student because they do a rural rotation with me, and I am able to make a connection between the classroom, the exam room, the housing community where Siena's doing art projects. So you know, that's going to have a much more of a ripple effect. So for me, it's about choosing engagements. And you know, the way I work, the phone rings and I say, how can I assist? But that's always with how can I assist organizations? How can I assist professionals? How can I assist systems in being more effective in being able to reach a larger population, to be able to deliver trauma-informed services. So for me, it's just more like choosing the domain that I work in, and yeah, so that's much more on a systems level. So you know, it's a balance, and you know, you don't have clients saying, "I love you, thank you so much, you helped me so much," and there's not that immediate reward, and it's also very long-term work. A lot of the ways that we make impact is at the level of policy, and that's hard, ungrateful work that you know, the end result may not occur within your lifetime. I mean, I started working 40 years ago, and a single payer system was imminent. And 40 years later, I don't know. So it's a little bit harder work, and I think that's also then why you know, among collaborators there needs to be solidarity, because there's only a finite number of people that you can see. But I think that if we think about deeper solutions, we don't get so lost in the endless line of people that we just absolutely cannot serve. And if we get at the level of policy and starting about equity, then we're saying, oh, what's up with resources and the way that resources are distributed, and how are you just like SOL because you're rural and it's too far away to get to a specialist? We've got some major imbalances and inequities in that way. So you know, I don't mean to medicalize things, but you know, in the same way that we have, you know, physicians working with individuals. We need community level physicians, and which really we call them community organizers.
Yeah.
That can do community level diagnosis, not that the community is sick, but doing assessment, doing what's going on here, and how can we pull things together to work on that. The other thing I just wanted to say, getting back to the earlier question around trauma informed and community level trauma. Trauma is pervasive, and it's everywhere. And I know that it's kind of like in the past few years come kind of trendy. And I get to the level of like, there's trauma porn everywhere. And I kind of want to cringe now kind of every time. So I just want to say my sort of little unpopular piece about trauma is that it's pervasive. It's everywhere. What we do is understand about systems and history of oppression and violence, and how we were affected and involved in that in our lives historically, et cetera, account for that, account for it in our practice. And then how do we recover and repair? And the place for museums is there's an old dicho in northern New Mexico, cultura cura, the culture cures, right? And so, the cultural cure, I mean, in the culture that I was raised in, that is you dance, you come together, you create culture together, you perpetuate culture together. I don't know, I saw in the New York Times this morning that, they're bombed out in the Ukraine, they're hanging Christmas lights because tomorrow and the weekend is Eastern Orthodox Christmas. And I was raised in the Eastern Church, and so it was very warm. So this is Christmas time for us, and it was very warming in terms of like bombed out shelter, and soldiers are hanging up lights. And so that's trauma on steroids going on right now.
Totally.
And it's reactivating trauma that goes back and back and back and back and back for those folks. Mel Brooks was a Ukrainian Jew. Talking about trauma-informed therapy. Watch a history of the world.
Totally.
Humor, right? And so what I'm saying is that we got to acknowledge the trauma. We need it in the impact, everything, but we really need to focus on our recovery and creating the conditions of recovery.
Exactly.
But we get really stuck on, and that just needs to be taken for granted competencies in the way that we work. Whatever sector we're working in, understand how trauma shows up in your sector, whether it's you bringing it in or somebody else bringing it in, account for it, work with it, and, deal with it. But focusing on resilience and strengths and recovery, I think is because, communities are really tired of being told they're screwed up.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
it's why I embedded myself in a school.
I run for the hills when I hear somebody coming into Peñasco wanting to talk about trauma.
I love Peñasco.
I hate the word even now, Julie. I'm like, I don't like to use that word, because you're right. The connotations that exist with it are immense. Sorry, Siena, I interrupted you.
She's right.
Well, that's
everywhere on a daily basis. Somebody's doing whatever it was that you didn't want somewhere, somehow. And it's amazing. So it occurs to me that culture and art save lives. And that's a good deal of our recovery. And those things, again, all of this linked together. And I think we've got some great ideas of things that the museums can do, should do. And of course, then how do we deliver it to the public and draw them in? That's the PR. Right.
And that's how we have to work together, because it's not going to happen just at your end, not going to happen at our end. No. That's why we have to pull our resources together. And, one of the things I have to say real quickly is that the fact that I embedded in a school is because that's where the children are. And I'm telling you, I can get overwhelmed with what's going on with families. So I'll just walk out of the nurturing center and head to a classroom and I feel better. So, there's nothing like creating with children. It is really one of the most magnificent things I can see myself doing. And so if I get down, I just head to a classroom and I was playing 4-on-4 basketball with the boys today because that was what they needed to do. And
Yeah.
so I find that being able to create those positive experiences is what I am there to do.
Absolutely.
You know
And
what you
Sienna,
just said?
I'm sorry, one thing I wanted to add to that, just to balance the trauma narrative, is that, yeah, we have whatever we have to work with, but we are also incredibly close to the elements of recovery. We are closer to the elements of recovery because we have the schools so proximate and we're so involved in schools, because we have the forest, because we have a land-based lifestyle. I heard a veteran giving testimony in front of the legislature many years ago in support of, I don't know, they were expanding the Pecos wilderness. And he talked about when he was in Iraq, in the worst of circumstances, he sat there imagining being in the forest hunting with his brother and his father and his, and when he got home, that's the first place that he went to begin his recovery from his trauma from being at war. So if you think about how close we are, if you think about how small we are, if you think about all of the resources and the beauty and the everything around us, we are closer to the elements of recovery than just about any place I can imagine. And so if we continue
planet.
So if we continue to see this and grow it and help each other and direct each other towards those elements and make them accessible and bring them into our economy, I think we have a whole lot to work with.
And you know what else we have to work with? If you notice that several of us are ladies of a little bit extra age, and that ability to go out and play basketball with the boys. Thank you very much. Do you know what street cred that is that just got you? I mean, they now love you. I mean, not that they didn't before, but that's one more element of that joining and combining that creates the hand across the generations. And that's where we need to go.
So I want to just, as we're getting ready to wrap up, it's just about 7 o'clock. And so I want to say that if you all get a chance, come out to the museum and see, we have a smallish exhibition, but one that's dear to my heart. So we had a collaboration with Vista Grande High School this fall, and the community coordinator over there set it up so that it's a community immersion program. And I was able to go as a representative of the museum into the classroom for 3 hours a week during the course of this. So essentially every student at Vista Grande had 3 hours of classroom immersion in the world of a museum, and then had 3 hours of time in the museum in person. And we did it by grade level. And the culmination of that is a wonderful school-wide collage that the kids created.
Oh, great.
And so that's at the museum right now. Also, we're on winter hours and we are closed Wednesdays. So we're open Thursday through Tuesday from 10 to 5. I am so thrilled to have met you ladies. And I think that there are many conversations yet to be had with other organizations as well. And love the idea of having conversations in the museum galleries. So we'll see what emerges for the future. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise.
Thank you. Be well. I'm going to go ahead and end it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.